I never expected that a late-night knock on my door from a heartbroken neighbor would change my life, but that's exactly what happened. Sometimes the moments that redefine your entire existence don't arrive with a grand announcement. They show up looking tired and lost, asking for nothing more than a place to crash for the night. And sometimes, if you're brave enough or just too tired to say no, you open the door and let them in, completely unaware that you're also letting in your future. My name is Miles. Back then, I was living a life that was meticulously, almost comically, quiet. I worked from home as a technical writer, which meant my days were a predictable cycle of lukewarm coffee, the gentle clatter of my keyboard, and the low hum of the refrigerator. My apartment was my sanctuary, a small, neat space on the third floor of a brick building that had seen better decades. It was a life of routine, safe and insulated, but tinged with a loneliness so constant it had become a part of the furniture, as unremarkable as the scuff marks on the hardwood floor. The building itself was a character in my life. The walls were thin, a testament to its age, and I'd learned the rhythms of my neighbors through a symphony of muffled sounds. I knew Mrs. Gable downstairs watched game shows every afternoon, her triumphant shouts punctuating my silent proofreading. I knew the couple on my left argued about who was supposed to take out the recycling every Tuesday morning. And I knew about Caleb. Caleb lived across the hall. He was less of a neighbor and more of a presence, a low-frequency hum of vibrant life that seeped through my door. He was a carpenter, and sometimes the faint, clean scent of sawdust would linger in the hallway after he passed. I'd hear his heavy work boots on the stairs, a solid, grounding sound that was the opposite of my own quiet footsteps. I'd catch glimpses of him through my peephole, or in the hallway as I was grabbing my mail, tall and broad-shouldered, with perpetually messy brown hair and a smile that seemed to come easily to him. He had a girlfriend, a pretty, bubbly woman whose laughter often echoed down the corridor. I'd see them coming and going, his arms slung casually around her shoulders, their lives seemingly perfect and completely separate from my own. To me, Caleb was the embodiment of a world I only observed. He was confident, extroverted, and, as far as I could tell, perfectly straight. He existed in a category of person I had long ago labeled unattainable and filed away in the part of my brain reserved for beautiful things you look at but don't touch, like a painting in a museum or a sunset over the ocean. He was a pleasant background detail in the quiet movie of my life. And then, one Thursday night, the soundtrack of the hallway changed. Usually, Caleb's apartment was a source of warm, happy noise, music, laughter. But that night, the sounds were sharp and fractured. I heard raised voices, not the words themselves, but the angry, wounded cadence. It was the unmistakable rhythm of a fight, the kind that feels final. I turned up the volume on my television, a futile attempt to give them some privacy, my own heart thumping with a strange, second-hand anxiety. Then, an hour later, a door slammed shut with gut-wrenching finality. I heard footsteps, quick and sharp, receding down the stairs. After that, there was only silence. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet, more unsettling than the shouting had been. I sat on my couch, the muted television flickering in the dark, and just listened to the nothingness from across the hall. I felt a pang of sympathy for him, this man I barely knew. Heartbreak is a universal language, after all. Another hour passed. I was getting ready for bed, going through my own silent, solitary rituals, when a knock came at my door. It wasn't loud or demanding, just a soft, hesitant tapping. My first thought was that I'd imagined it. No one ever knocked on my door this late. I held my breath, waiting, and it came again, just as tentative as before. I padded over to the door and peered through the peephole. My breath caught in my throat. It was Caleb. The wide lens distorted his face, but I could see enough. His hair was a wreck, his shoulders were slumped, and the usual easy confidence was gone, replaced by an aura of pure devastation. He looked utterly lost. My own social anxiety screamed at me to pretend I wasn't home, to just stand there in the dark until he went away. It would be the safe thing to do, the easy thing. But then he ran a hand through his hair and let out a shaky breath, and the sight of his raw vulnerability overrode my own fear. I unlocked the deadbolt, the sound echoing loudly in the quiet hall. I opened the door just a crack. "Caleb," I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looked up, and his eyes were red-rimmed and exhausted. For a second, He just stared at me, as if surprised that I had actually answered. Hey, he finally managed, his voice thick. Miles, right? I just nodded, my throat suddenly dry. I know this is insane, he continued, gesturing vaguely back towards his own apartment. And, we don't know each other, but it's over. She left, he swallowed hard. All my stuff is in there, but I can't be in there right now. Not tonight. He looked down at his feet, then back up at me, his gaze pleading. I'm so sorry to ask this, man, but could I maybe crash on your couch? Just for tonight. I'll be gone first thing in the morning, I swear. I just have nowhere else to go. Every cautious instinct I had was flashing red. This was an intrusion, a disruption to my carefully curated peace. It was messy and complicated. But looking at him, seeing the cracks in that self-assured facade, I saw not the unattainable neighbor from across the hall, but just a person who was hurting. And my quiet, lonely life suddenly felt selfish in the face of his genuine distress. Yeah, I heard myself say, the word leaving my mouth before I had fully processed the decision. I opened the door wider. Yeah, of course. Come on in. The look of relief that washed over his face was so profound it nearly buckled him. He stepped inside, bringing the scent of rain and a palpable wave of sorrow into my quiet, orderly apartment. The door clicked shut behind him, and in that moment, the entire landscape of my life shifted on its axis. The first hour was a masterpiece of awkwardness. Caleb stood in the middle of my living room, looking like a giant who had wandered into a dollhouse. He seemed too big for the space, his broad shoulders and restless energy a stark contrast to my calm, muted decor. He kept apologizing, repeating how sorry he was to impose, his hands shoved deep into his pockets as if to keep them from accidentally breaking something. It's really fine, I said for what felt like the 10th time, my own voice sounding unnaturally high. Honestly, don't worry about it. I busied myself with a task, a classic move from the socially anxious person's handbook. Do you want some tea? Or water? Tea sounds. Yeah, tea sounds good, he mumbled, finally sinking onto the edge of my couch. He stared at the floor, his whole body a portrait of defeat. While the water heated in the kettle, I watched him from the small kitchen pass through. I saw the way his hands trembled slightly as he rested them on his knees. This was the same man I'd seen effortlessly hoisting lumber into his truck, the same man whose easy laugh filled the hallway. Seeing him so diminished felt strangely illicit, like I was witnessing something I wasn't supposed to see. I brought him a mug of chamomile tea, and our fingers brushed as he took it from me. It was a tiny, fleeting contact, but it sent a jolt straight through me. His skin was warm. I pulled my hand back as if I'd been burned, my face flushing in the dim light. If he noticed, he gave no sign. He just cradled the mug in his large hands, letting the steam wash over his face. We sat in a thick, weighted silence, the only sound the soft hum of the refrigerator I was so used to. I didn't know what to say. What do you say to a man whose world has just crumbled? Platitudes felt cheap and intrusive. So I said nothing. I just sat in the armchair opposite him and sipped my own tea, trying to project an aura of calm, unassuming support. I was offering the only thing I had, my quiet presence. After a long time, he finally spoke, his voice low and raspy. We were together for 3 years, he said to the rug. I really thought we were going to get married. He let out a harsh, bitter laugh that held no humor. Guess I'm a bad judge of character. Or maybe just a bad boyfriend. I'm sorry, I said softly. And I was. The pain radiating from him was a tangible thing in the room. He didn't unload the whole story on me. There were no dramatic details or angry recriminations. He just spoke in broken fragments about the pressure, the slow drifting apart, the final argument that was more about a dozen small things than one big one. He talked about feeling like he was constantly failing to meet an expectation he didn't understand. It wasn't a confession, just him thinking out loud, processing the shock of it all. I just listened, nodding occasionally, letting him fill the space with his grief. Eventually, he ran out of words. The exhaustion that had been hiding behind the adrenaline finally took over, and his whole body seemed to deflate. I got up and found a spare pillow and a thick quilt from the hall closet. Here, I said, placing them on the couch. It's not much, but it's warm. Thank you, Miles, he said, and the gratitude in his voice was so raw, so genuine, it made my chest ache. Really, thank you. He arranged the pillow and lay down, pulling the quilt up to his chin. He turned to face the back of the couch, a clear signal that the night was over. I turned off the main lamp, leaving only a small light on in the kitchen. "Good night, Caleb," I whispered to his back. A muffled "night" was the only reply. I retreated to my bedroom, closing the door behind me, my heart pounding a strange, unsteady rhythm. My safe, quiet world now had a heartbroken stranger sleeping in the middle of it. I woke up the next morning feeling like I hadn't slept at all. The knowledge that Caleb was just on the other side of my bedroom door made my entire apartment feel charged with a new energy. I crept out into the living room, half expecting him to be gone, for the whole thing to have been some strange, vivid dream. But he was still there, fast asleep on the couch, one arm thrown over his head. In sleep, the harsh lines of grief on his face had softened. He just looked young and vulnerable. I made coffee as quietly as I could, the familiar ritual a comfort in the strange new reality of my morning. I had assumed he would be true to his word and gone by the time I was up, but as the smell of brewing coffee filled the small apartment, he started to stir. He sat up slowly, running a hand over his face and through his already chaotic hair. He looked disoriented, his eyes blinking in the morning light filtering through the window. "Morning," I said, holding up the coffee pot in a silent offer. "God, morning," he groaned, his voice gravelly with sleep. "I'm so sorry, I totally overslept. I said I'd be out of your hair." He started to get up, a flicker of his usual, "I've got this energy returning." "Don't be ridiculous," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "You were exhausted. Stay, have some coffee." I poured him a mug and set it on the coffee table. He sank back onto the couch, looking immensely grateful. He wasn't gone. A strange mix of relief and anxiety fluttered in my stomach. That one night turned into a day, and then another night. He went back to his apartment only briefly, to shower and grab a change of clothes, returning to my place as if it were a safe harbor. We fell into an odd, temporary domesticity. We didn't talk much more about the breakup. Instead, we talked about other things. He asked about my work, and his eyes didn't glaze over when I tried to explain the dry, technical nature of it. He actually seemed interested. In return, he talked about his. He described the satisfaction of turning a pile of raw wood into something beautiful and functional, the smell of fresh-cut oak, the feeling of a perfectly joined corner. He spoke about it with a passion that transformed his face, chasing away the shadows of the last few days. And that's when I saw the first real crack in the persona I'd built for him in my head. "You know," he said, staring into his coffee cup one afternoon, "I always wanted to build furniture. Like, for myself. Art pieces, you know. Not just kitchen cabinets and decks for other people." He looked up at me, a shy, almost embarrassed look on his face. "My ex, she thought it was a dumb idea. Not practical. Not a way to make real money." He shrugged, a gesture meant to convey indifference, but his eyes told a different story. "She was probably right. I don't think it's dumb," I said immediately. "I think it sounds amazing, and I meant it." In that moment, the confident, extroverted carpenter I thought I knew was replaced by someone more complex, someone with a hidden dream he was afraid to admit to. He wasn't just the guy with the loud laugh and the pretty girlfriend. He was a person with vulnerabilities and insecurities, just like me. My attraction to him, which had always been a distant, aesthetic appreciation, began to deepen into something more real, more grounded. Later that day, I was making us a simple lunch, just soup and sandwiches, when the small, significant moment happened. It was nothing, really. A tiny, inconsequential event that my brain immediately cataloged and filed under important. I was carrying 2 bowls of soup to the coffee table where we were sitting. He moved to help me, reaching for one of the bowls at the same time I was setting it down. Our hands brushed. It wasn't like the night before, a fleeting, accidental touch. This time, our fingers tangled for a second, a warm, solid pressure of his hand against mine. The world seemed to slow down for a beat. I looked up and met his eyes, and there was a flicker of something in them. Surprise, maybe? Awareness? I don't know. The air between us grew thick and still. I pulled my hand away, my heart doing a frantic tap dance against my ribs. "Sorry," I mumbled, focusing intently on placing the bowl perfectly in the center of a coaster. "No, my bad," he said, his voice a little strained. He picked up his sandwich and took a bite, but the easy rhythm of our conversation was broken. We ate in a new kind of silence, one that wasn't sad or awkward, but charged. It was the silence of unspoken things, of a line that had been subtly, irrevocably crossed. I had touched him, and he had touched me back, and now the shape of the space between us had changed forever. Caleb stayed for a third night. He didn't ask this time, and I didn't offer. It was just an unspoken assumption. After we cleaned up from dinner, an easy, shared task that felt shockingly domestic, we settled on the couch to watch a movie. The tension from our earlier interaction had dissipated, replaced by a comfortable, quiet companionship. But it was still there, a low hum beneath the surface of things. I chose an old black and white film, something quiet and atmospheric. I don't even remember what it was. My focus wasn't on the screen. It was on the man sitting a careful foot away from me on the couch. I was acutely aware of his presence, of the warmth radiating from him, of the way his breathing deepened as the movie progressed. He was still emotionally fragile, I could tell. The bravado he'd managed to patch together during the day was starting to fray around the edges again. About halfway through the film, he shifted, turning to face me slightly. "Hey," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the movie's score. I turned down the volume. "Can I? This is going to sound weird." He hesitated, looking at his hands. I really don't want to be alone right now, even with you here. I don't know." His voice trailed off, thick with a resurfacing grief. "It's okay," I said, my heart aching for him. "You don't have to be." He let out a long, shaky breath. "Thanks." He settled back against the cushions, but he was restless. He kept shifting, adjusting his position, unable to get comfortable. The emotional exhaustion of the last few days was written all over him. He was fighting a losing battle against it. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, he began to list to one side. My side. It started with his shoulder just barely brushing against mine. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. I told myself it was an accident, that he was just trying to get comfortable. I didn't move. I barely breathed. I just sat there, rigid, as the movie played on, completely forgotten. Then, his movements became less subtle. He slumped further, and the light pressure of his shoulder became a solid, definite weight against me. My mind was screaming. A part of me, the cautious, self-protective part, wanted to shift away, to re-establish the safe distance between us. But another part, a hopeful, foolish part, was desperate for him to stay right where he was. Finally, with a soft sigh, he gave in to gravity and exhaustion. His head, heavy and warm, came to rest on my shoulder. And then, as if seeking a greater comfort, he shifted again, sliding down until his head was nestled in the space between my shoulder and my chest. His breathing evened out, deepening into the slow, steady rhythm of sleep. He had fallen asleep. On me. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. I was paralyzed, trapped under the warm, solid weight of him. I could feel the soft strands of his hair tickling my neck, smell the faint, clean scent of his shampoo. His arm was draped loosely across my stomach. It was the most terrifying and wonderful thing that had ever happened to me. This was a line so far beyond the one we'd crossed earlier that it was in a different universe. This was an act of profound, unconscious trust. He was a heartbroken man seeking comfort, I told myself sternly. This means nothing. He's not thinking, he's just sleeping. It's a platonic, desperate gesture. But my heart wasn't listening to my brain. My heart was whispering that no one, not even someone in a state of grief, does this without some level of instinctual comfort, some pull towards the person they're with. I don't know how long I sat there, motionless in the dark, with Caleb sleeping on my chest. It could have been minutes or hours. The movie ended, the credits rolled in silence, and the screen went black, plunging the room into near darkness, lit only by the faint glow from the streetlights outside. I didn't dare move a muscle for fear of waking him. I just sat there, feeling the rise and fall of his chest against mine, listening to his soft breathing, and letting the impossible hope bloom within me. It was an intimacy so intense it was almost painful, a silent, fragile moment that I knew, with absolute certainty, had just changed everything. I must have drifted off at some point, still sitting upright, a human pillow for the man sleeping on my chest. I woke with a start, not because of a noise, but because of a change in pressure. The world was in that hazy, pre-dawn state, the sky outside my window a soft, bruised purple. Caleb was stirring. I could feel the subtle shift of his muscles, the way his breathing hitched as he slowly swam up from the depths of sleep. I held my breath, my entire being focused on him. He lifted his head slightly, a low groan in his throat. For a long moment, he didn't move further. He just lay there, his cheek still pressed against my shirt, as if trying to place where he was. I could feel the moment his brain caught up with his body. He went completely still. The easy, sleeping weight of him was suddenly replaced by a tense, hyper-aware presence. Slowly, so slowly, he pushed himself up. He sat on his end of the couch, putting a few inches of loaded space between us. He didn't look at me. He just stared straight ahead at the dark television screen, running a hand over his face. The silence in the room was deafening. It was thick with questions and unspoken apologies, crackling with a new, terrifying awareness. He started, his voice a rough whisper. He cleared his throat. God, Miles, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. I just passed out. It's okay, I managed to say, though my voice was shaky. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anxiety and anticipation. This was it. This was the moment he would laugh it off, make a joke about being dead tired, and the fragile, intimate bubble would burst, leaving me exposed and foolish. But he didn't laugh. He finally turned to look at me, and his expression was one I couldn't decipher. It wasn't disgust or amusement. It was something else, something complicated and serious. No, it's not okay, he said, his gaze intense. I shouldn't have. He seemed to be wrestling with his own words, struggling to articulate something important. The easy camaraderie of the past few days was gone. In its place was this thick, charged carefulness. He got up abruptly. I'm going to go grab a shower at my place, he said, not looking at me again. And then he was gone, slipping out my front door and leaving me alone in the quiet, electrically charged apartment. The air where he had been sitting still felt warm. I spent the next 2 hours in a state of pure, unadulterated overthinking. My brain became a supercomputer dedicated to a single task, analyzing the event and its aftermath. I replayed the entire night in slow motion. The way he'd leaned against me, the weight of his head on my chest, the sound of his breathing. I remembered the warmth of him, the solid, comforting reality of his presence. It had felt so real, so right. Then my focus shifted to the morning. His reaction. He hadn't recoiled in horror. He hadn't shoved me away. He had just gone still, and then retreated into a shell of awkwardness. He was sorry, but for what? For falling asleep on me? Or for the intimacy it represented? Was he embarrassed? Confused? Or was he just being polite before making a swift exit from the apartment of the weird, quiet gay guy who let him crash on his couch? My hope, which had soared to such dangerous heights in the dark, was now in a nosedive, locked in a brutal dogfight with my fear. Hope whispered that his confusion was a sign that he felt something, too. That waking up in my arms had stirred something in him he wasn't prepared for. Fear screamed that I was nothing more than a convenient, warm body, a temporary comfort object for a grieving straight man. Fear told me I was projecting my own desires onto a situation that had a perfectly logical, platonic explanation. I was making a fool of myself. Of course, he was just being kind. He was a good guy, caught in a bad situation. I was the one turning it into something else, building a romantic narrative out of a simple act of desperation and exhaustion. The disappointment was a physical ache in my chest. I had let myself get carried away, and now the crash was inevitable. I felt a familiar, weary resignation settle over me. This is why I kept my life quiet. This is why I didn't let people in. It was safer this way. He was gone for a long time, longer than a shower would take. I was convinced he had packed a bag and left for good, unable to face the awkwardness of coming back. I started mentally preparing myself for seeing him in the hallway in the future, for the stiff nods and averted eyes that would replace the brief, intense connection we'd shared. It was better to expect the worst. That way, you could never be truly disappointed. Right. When my front door finally opened again, I jumped. Caleb stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. He looked different. He had showered and changed into fresh clothes. But the change was more than that. The frantic, uncertain energy from the morning was gone. He looked calm, but it was the calm of someone who has made a difficult decision. My stomach plummeted. This was it. The "we need to talk." He didn't sit down. He just stood there by the door for a moment, his hands in his pockets. "I went for a walk," he said. His voice was steady. "I did a lot of thinking." I just nodded, unable to form words. I braced myself for the gentle letdown, for the "you've been a great friend," but speech that was surely coming. "Look, Miles," he started, and my heart clenched. "About last night. And this morning. I need to be honest with you. And with myself, I guess." He took a deep breath, like a diver about to plunge into cold water. When Sarah and I broke up, I came here. I knocked on your door. And it wasn't random." My brain stuttered. "Not random. What did that mean?" "I've noticed you," he continued, his gaze unwavering. "For months. In the hallway, at the mailboxes. You're always so quiet. And you have this look on your face sometimes, like you're figuring out the secrets of the universe. I was intrigued. I wanted to talk to you, but I never knew how. I'm not good at that." He gave a small, self-deprecating smile. "I'm good at loud, not quiet." I was reeling, trying to process his words. He had noticed me. Caleb, had been thinking about me, the quiet guy across the hall. It didn't seem possible. "My relationship with Sarah," he went on, "it hasn't been right for a long time. We were just going through the motions. The fight the other night. It was just the thing that finally made it official. But my heart wasn't in it anymore. My heart." He paused, looking down for a second before meeting my eyes again. "I think it's been looking for an excuse to look somewhere else. And when she left, the only place I wanted to go was here. To your door." The air left my lungs in a rush. This was not the speech I had been expecting. "And then last night," he said, his voice dropping lower. "Falling asleep like that. I've never done that. Ever. Not with her. And when I woke up this morning. On your chest." He took a step closer. "My first thought wasn't, 'Oh God, this is weird.' My first thought was, 'This feels right.' And that scared the hell out of me. Because it felt more right than anything has in years." He was standing in front of me now, so close I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. I spent the last 3 hours walking around the park, trying to make sense of it, trying to tell myself I was just upset and confused. But that's not it. The only thing I'm confused about is why it took me so long to realize it. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before gently cupping my cheek. His touch was electric, 1,000 times more potent than the accidental brushes before. His thumb stroked my skin softly. "Am I crazy?" he whispered, his gaze searching mine. "Is this just in my head? Or are you feeling this too?" Tears pricked my eyes, a combination of shock and overwhelming relief. "No," I breathed out, my voice thick with emotion. "You're not crazy." I leaned into his touch, a silent surrender. I've had a crush on you since the day you moved in." A slow, breathtaking smile spread across his face. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. "Yeah," he murmured. He leaned in, closing the small distance between us. His lips met mine, and it wasn't tentative or questioning anymore. It was a kiss of confirmation, of discovery, of 1,000 unspoken things finally being said. It was gentle and sure, a perfect meeting of hope and reality. All the tension, all the fear, all the years of quiet longing melted away in that one moment. He pulled back slightly, resting his forehead against mine. "So," he said, his voice a low, happy rumble. "The couch is free tonight. But, I was kind of hoping I wouldn't have to use it." The weeks that followed felt like waking up from a long, gray dream into a world saturated with color. The quiet, orderly space of my apartment was transformed. It was no longer just my apartment. It became ours. Caleb's presence filled it in a way that was nothing like the first few days. It wasn't the energy of a guest, but the comfortable, settled energy of home. Slowly, his life began to merge with mine. It started with a toothbrush in my bathroom holder, then a few changes of clothes in my closet. One Saturday, he showed up with a box filled with his favorite coffee mugs and the worn-out Neil Young records his ex had hated. We spent the afternoon arranging them on my shelves, my minimalist decor making way for his warmer, more rustic tastes. My apartment, once a fortress of solitude, was becoming a shared landscape. We learned the small, intimate details of each other's lives. I learned that he hummed, slightly off-key, when he was making coffee. I learned he couldn't sleep without the window cracked open, even in the cold. He learned that I needed absolute silence when I was writing, and he would put on headphones to watch television, a small, thoughtful gesture that made my heart ache with affection. We went on dates, real dates. We went to movies, had dinner at a small Italian place downtown, and took long walks in the park where he'd had his revelation. It felt normal and extraordinary all at once. His apartment across the hall became a ghost, a storage unit for the life he used to have. Eventually, we spent a weekend moving the last of his things over. It was mostly his tools and some half-finished woodworking projects. He set up a small workshop in my spare room, the one I had only ever used for storage. The clean scent of sawdust now filled our home, a smell I had once only associated with a distant stranger, but now associated with him, with us. One evening, a few months after that first night, we were lying on the couch, watching some mindless television show. The awkward foot of space that had once separated us was a distant memory. I was stretched out, and he was using my chest as a pillow, his head rising and falling with my every breath. His arm was slung around me, his hand resting over my heart. It was the exact position from that first, terrifying, wonderful night, but now it wasn't an accident. It was our normal. It was where he belonged. I ran my fingers through his hair, the familiar texture a source of deep comfort. He stirred, looking up at me with sleepy, contented eyes. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured. I smiled down at him. "Just how we got here," I said softly. "From you knocking on my door, completely broken, to this," he tightened his arm around me, a silent affirmation. This comfortable, easy intimacy, this profound sense of rightness, it had all sprung from a moment of chaos and heartbreak. It was a beautiful paradox. He had come to my door seeking a temporary shelter from a storm, and somehow, we had ended up building a permanent home together. Life is funny, isn't it? You can spend years building walls around yourself, curating a life that's safe and predictable, believing you have everything under control. You think you know the shape of your world, the limits of your own happiness. And then one night, there's a knock on the door. It's a sound that can be so easily ignored. You can pretend you don't hear it. You can choose to stay inside your quiet, protected world, untouched and unchanged. Or you can take a breath, turn the lock, and open it. You can let the storm in. You never know. It might just be the best thing that ever happens to you. It might be the person you were waiting for all along. The one who was meant to come in and rearrange all the furniture of your heart, making a space that finally, truly, feels like home.